Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have Adrian Cox on, and we had a beautiful discussion about his latest exhibition at Corey Helford Gallery that's up currently right now for the next couple of weeks. And man, what an amazing journey he's been on to create this exhibition. We talked a lot about how he's kind of went through a creative block and sort of the process of how he slowly worked his way through that to develop the just monumental work that was created for this exhibition. We talked a lot about the use of the imaginal and also the mythopoetic sort of vision and approach to art creating and how powerful that is for tapping into the unconscious, for allowing people to maybe reconnect with their inner world or their own sort of mythopoetic, imaginal self, and how important that is in today's society where everything's very numbing, everything's so fast paced. Talked about a few aspects of the show where he developed this ritual of unknowing, creating his own ambient music and hypnotic tracks to get people into these kind of altered states of consciousness. Really powerful and interesting way of approaching not only the gallery space, but also coupling it with the heavily detailed, ornamented, magical, monumental, kind of epic paintings that he's doing using indirect painting process. So we learned a lot about his whole process for how he developed these works and his sort of perspective around them. Just so many cool things that we talked about that are super fascinating, and y'all don't want to miss it. So here you go, Adrian Cox. All right, Adrian Cox, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to connect with you this morning. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be
Yeah,
here.
for sure. And congrats on your most recent show at Corey Helford Gallery. I mean, that show looked amazing. I didn't get to see it in person, but the images that I saw and obviously all the paintings, just looking on their website, so much work went into that show. And I can imagine it's exhausting now that it's done, how you're feeling. And so I appreciate you
It's
being,
cathartic, yeah.
yeah, being with me here on the podcast, because I'm just really fascinated by the work that you do, these kinds of incredible personal mythologies that you are creating these worlds out of. And I just think there's so much fascinating territory that we can explore together. But I think a really good place to begin, I do with a lot of my guests, because I think it's always really interesting to get perspective in terms of when your sort of spiritual quest really began, when you really began to be there's more to this story that I'm being told about than I can fully articulate. And I'm curious how to discover more of it. You know what I mean? And get sort of
hmm
being initiated into looking at the world through a different lens, perhaps. Is there a particular moment or point that you can think back where that kind of transition began in terms of how you viewed your experience as a human being in this crazy place?
I think those moments for me, rather than being this single lightning bolt, epiphany initiatory experience, I would describe them as a series of moments in my life that thinking back on, it's less perhaps a traditionally spiritual revelation and more perhaps a way of relating to the world that
hmm
it's like these moments where you pass into a different way of relating to the world.
Yeah.
So, before we started recording, I was chatting about my background going back to childhood, and I was saying that I think for visual artists, a lot of what drives us in terms of both how we make our work and also the general worldview that carries us forward in our work comes back to this formative groundwork of childhood.
hmm
And just anecdotally, I was thinking back on when I was a kid, really young, maybe 5, 6. Of course, I drew a bunch and all this, but I grew up in rural Georgia, in the southeastern United States, and I lived out in a house pretty far back in the woods. we had a couple miles of forest in every direction, and
Beautiful.
we lived on a little man-made lake at the end of a dusty dirt road. And like, we had neighbors, but there were only like three of them.
Wow.
So pretty isolated. And I remember wandering around in the forest around my house, and my parents were hippies. Like, they were hippies, they were gardeners. They framed the place that we lived as a sacred space. So I think even
Oh,
at a young age,
wow.
I kind of understood that. We had an incredible garden that, my parents would have me singing little like songs about being grateful to the Mother Earth before I'd eat, that kind of thing. They were,
Beautiful.
from more of a Buddhist religious tradition, the Shambhala Buddhist.
Oh, I got you.
But they never put any pressure on me to have any practice of any kind. They were practicing Buddhists, but never like brought me into that. Never were like, here, you should read this. You should sit and
Hmm.
meditate. They'd talk to me about it and they'd share the ideas, but there was never any pressure to do anything other than find my own path.
Beautiful.
And when I was a kid, I remember wandering around in the forest around where I lived, and I just like kind of pace and daydream and just let the mind wander in the way that kids do, where you're just kind of, I think just like being moving allows you to enter that like kind of trance state that kids do, where
Hmm.
you allow a story to kind of develop and just let your mind kind of go. And I'd wander around and I'd find interesting things in the forest, like an interesting leaf, an interesting stick, a rock, an animal skull. I mean, we'd find incredible like deer skulls, antlers, that kind of thing out in the forest.
Yeah.
I think we had like a raccoon skull. There was even a fox skull at one point.
Wow.
And I would collect these things just out of, anything that sparked wonder, just
For
wandering around the
sure.
forest as I was daydreaming. And then I'd come back to my room, and on this little altar I'd set up because, I saw my parents kept an altar where they'd meditate. And, I wasn't imitating their altars. I was creating my own kind of experience. And I would build these mandalas out of the things I'd find in the forest, where it'd be
Wow.
these elaborate kind of spiraling geometric altarpieces that I'd make out of just things I found interesting in the woods. And for me at that point, like when I'd be sitting at that altar and maybe I'd light incense or meditate for like just a couple of minutes, but
Hmm.
I don't think I really fully thought of it as a spiritual thing because I was too young to understand what that really meant.
Yeah.
It was a kind of an aesthetic practice. It was like, relating to the forest and the world around me in this engagement through a sense of wonder and
Hmm.
play,
Yeah.
and then being able to turn that into something that felt spiritual aesthetically, like, and then like using ornamentation to elevate it.
Yeah.
I feel like that practice as a kid is one of those kernels that's like an origin story that's like, well, okay, like how did I get to the point in my professional career where I'm making what people might consider spiritual art? Well,
Hmm.
there's a story there too, things that I've read, things that I've thought, beginning to meditate as an adult, but I think at a fundamental level, it perhaps goes back to that very foundational level of like, the origin story of being a kid and finding a way to engage with a spiritual relationship with the world founded on play and wonder
Yeah.
and aesthetic appreciation.
Wow.
And then, in this new show, I've fully brought that practice back to life because there's an altarpiece in the show.
Yeah. Hmm.
I kind of made that little idiosyncratic quirk of my practice into a public a public facing piece with this installation that I've called the Altar of Unknowing,
Yeah.
that uses some of the iconography from my works and an altarpiece with four meditation cushions around it for people to sit and meditate
Yeah. I saw you
in
did
the
like an
gallery.
event with it too, where you like led a guided meditation and did
Yeah.
like a whole event for it. I mean, that's amazing to be able to charge the space like that and to create like not only obviously all the work in there and create that container, but then to actually activate that container,
Hmm.
through an offering like that to the public. I think that was really cool to see
Yeah.
something like that.
Well, and I think this last show for me, if you just look at the paintings, I think, I am particularly proud of the paintings that I've made for the show. I think they're strong, like just
Oh yeah, they're
outside of any
amazing.
context of anything else I've done for the show.
Oh yeah.
But I always stand behind the paintings that I make. I'm always trying to be one step ahead of what I think I'm capable of making.
Hmm.
I think about this interview with David Bowie that circulates on social sometimes I see where he's talking about trying to be out ahead of what you think you're capable of doing as an artist and
Hmm.
finding the interesting work by pushing yourself beyond what you think you're capable of. You
Yeah.
know, I always try to do that with my paintings and so I'm always at least proud of the latest project I've done.
Yeah. That's
I kind of
amazing.
demand that of myself. But that being said, I think there's also a side to this show that is a little new for me where I've taken some of the parts of my practice that I've maybe intentionally kept occluded and put a light on them and transform them into something that's not, merely process for me as an artist, but product in the sense of opening the gates to other people participating in it in some
Yeah.
capacity.
What
So
inspired that?
well, I think it's the process, but kind of. So anyone who's seen my paintings knows that they're incredibly densely, intricately planned,
Yeah.
right? Like to make one of my paintings, particularly because I'm using indirect painting methods and I'm trying to, make these things rendered in a way where the illumination of light in the work, like if you see it in person, it's it's I want to create a painting that seemingly emits light itself.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Which requires an immense amount of planning. And it also, because I'm using transparent color, does tend to limit how much editing I do on the panel
Hmm.
itself once I'm painting. So,
Yeah.
I think there are artists that are much more improvisational in how they work. And I think identifying myself with surrealism as kind of a mode of working, does beg the question of like, well, if it's all so planned, how is it surrealist? Because
Mm.
how is it engagement with the subconscious if you're, intricately planning this thing to the point where you kind of know what it's going to look like roughly going in?
Yeah.
And for me, it's about creating parts of the process where even though the end product is this highly, highly finished, polished thing, devotionally ornamented thing,
Yeah.
that the process to arrive there needs to be indirect and circuitous, right? Like
Yeah.
I try not to take direct lines
Yeah.
because when I do that, I'm just illustrating the ideas of the ego. This like, I have an idea, I conceive an idea. Maybe I read something that I thought was interesting, and I'm combining it with some idea, like there's some image that I have in my head. And usually, if I work that way, I can still make something somewhat interesting, but I tend not to have as many moments of just surprise and discovery in the
Yeah.
work itself. And so I've developed ways of working where, yes, I'm making polished, highly planned paintings, but to do that, I'm sculpting my figures out of like, impromptu materials like fake flowers, wax, that kind of
Hmm.
thing. I'm creating sculptures and seeing how that works, or sculpting little dioramas and playing around with that, or creating collages to,
Yeah.
try and figure out like a more abstract part of the painting, or, in this recent exhibition, because, the narrative of the show had to do with the character entering the dream world.
Yeah.
I was using a mix of automatic writing and a cut up technique to create text pieces that I'd done sketch off of. So,
Wow.
the first thing I do is I had a big box of scraps of paper where I had a mix of things that I was reading. I just Xerox like sentences, like full sentences from what I was reading, but like out of context or like
Yeah.
pieces of sentences.
Hmm.
And it was a mix of like some philosophy and spiritual texts, a lot of mythology, a lot of I went down a rabbit hole of reading a bunch of medieval King Arthur stories about
Cool.
questing for the Holy Grail. I
Yeah.
was reading Parzival ended up being the Wolfram von Eschenbach book
Yeah.
ended up being kind of a mythological, framework that I could kind of pin some of my ideas to
Yeah,
find my own way. Sometimes I kind of like to work off of an archetypal map.
for sure.
And I found some synchronistic kind of alignments with the Arthurian story with what I had already been developing. And so I kind of was reading that. And so in this box, I had scraps of Arthurian lore,
Wow.
random like, books on philosophy and magic that I had on my bookshelf, like some other things that were contextually completely different, and then like also pieces of dreams from my own dream journals.
Wow.
Because I didn't want to,
That's
take
an
a dream
interesting
that
combination of material. I love it.
Well, it's like, if I was just going to take a dream that I had and then paint it, that's such a personal meaning.
Yeah,
Telling someone I had a dream, and let me describe it to you. Like all those symbols are intensely personal. And
for
so that's
sure.
ultimately like a somewhat indulgent form that the art can take in that
Yeah.
manifestation of kind of subconscious messaging. So it's like trying to take that raw material and shape something more universally shared out of it. So rather
Right.
than having it
Yeah.
be my own dreamscape, I'm using this mythological world I'm building in this character, this sculptor character named Maker. And
Hmm.
so because I'm making Maker's dream, not Adrian Cox's dream,
Yeah.
right? I can pull elements from my own dreams and I can pull elements from things that I'm reading. And then I'd pull like 4 or 5 scraps of paper from a box with like 1,000 pieces of paper in it,
Wow.
and I'd lay them out and form some semi-coherent kind of semblance and order of what they were, and it wouldn't be a full narrative. And then I would, just using a pen, draft out automatic writing style to fill in the gaps and create a mythic feeling dream out of that.
Wow.
And then I would I would use that text as something to like figure out a sketch that would be in response to it. And then the
Got
paintings would
it.
come from that.
Wow. That's
So,
super interesting because you are like building this bridge between the subjective and the universal, between like your own dreamscape, but then these kind of like, the more of like material from the objective world, be it through
mhm,
philosophy or mythologies, like stories out there, and like creating this incredible, like, I guess, like this incredible combination of the two, which I think is kind of more akin to what we're playing out here in some way. It is this kind of like interesting dynamic between the subjective and the objective occurrence. And so it's kind of really fascinating that you've modeled that in the way that you've built this process. So
You
just,
know, I think
yeah.
like William Blake has been a touchstone for me as like an artist
Hmm.
that I increasingly find alignment with. And the difference being that William Blake was a visionary from day one just because he was having mad, crazy hallucinations out of nowhere. Like, when you're
Yeah.
seeing angels in the trees, you don't have to try that hard to find your deep content.
Yeah. Right.
Um, but for the rest of us, like we got to be pulling, things out of boxes and like trying
Yeah.
to trick ourselves into like, essentially, I guess to boil down a very complicated process into its simplest effort is the goal was to create a dialogue between my work and my subconscious. That,
Yeah.
the work is not a manifestation of the subconscious. I'm not letting the subconscious drive the car. uh, it's like a call and response where I would
Mm.
create something that would be in response to things that were happening on a deeper level, like only semi-perceptible level. And then perhaps I would then have a dream that would be in response to this thing I was trying to work out in a sketchbook or in a painting. And
Yeah.
that would lead me to the next painting that would be a response to that. So it's not an illustrating what's happening, the process of the subconscious mind. It's
Yeah.
creating a dialogue in order to find something that's, a potential like third shared space, right?
Yes,
So
exactly. Yeah. No, that
yeah,
makes
and
perfect sense. Wow.
I think that's the thing about the mythology, why I keep referring to it as like a mythology rather than like, it being on a purely personal level. As I want it to feel like a shared space. I
Yeah.
refer to it as this like imaginal space that I'm kind of carving out and exploring. And it's, on some level, I've been doing it long enough that it does kind of live in some other people's heads. Like it takes up less, real estate than it does in mine. But
Yeah.
people visit the borderlands from time to time.
Yeah.
So, that's all to say, I think there's a whole hidden part of my practice that I've kept kind of in the background where it's not secret. I'll talk about it, but it's had nothing to do with what I finally present in the final
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
And in this show, uh, part of what I started doing, to continue a fairly long conversation about process, is I started making hypnosis tracks for myself.
Yeah. I saw that.
Um, yeah, and it actually started for my wife, not for myself.
Hmm.
I was listening, I was beginning to listen to hypnosis and kind of feel out how it could be useful for me in my practice.
Yeah.
There's a hypnotherapist that also he kind of has a firm foot in a culture as well. Has a podcast called This Podcast is a Ritual. But this
Hmm.
guy Devin Person has a couple of really great hypnosis tapes that he made. He's got one on his website that's for sale called Hypnosis for Magical People that I liked, and it's kind of a visit to like an internal temple where you like commune with like a wise advisor kind of situation.
Hmm.
And I liked the formatting of it, and I kind of for my first attempt at this, I bought this microphone here for pretty cheap, and just like essentially made a private recording of just me speaking into the microphone where I knew very little, next to nothing about hypnosis, but I knew what worked when I
Yeah.
listened.
Yeah.
So I just imitated what I was hearing and changed the language and changed the framing and the imagery to like, fit what I was attempting. And I made this piece for my wife who travels for her work and suffers from insomnia sometimes just
Wow.
from stress. And
Yeah.
I made this. I think I framed it as a sacred grove summoning. The idea
Wow.
essentially, because she's also from the South and like has this connection to like forests on a personal level. So,
Yeah.
a visit to an internal space of rest and recovery uh,
Beautiful.
within the mind, framed as a forest, right?
Yeah.
Um, so those are my first attempts, and then I kind of realized that there was something promising in there for my work itself.
Hmm.
So I kind of turned that developing hobby I had created for myself inward, and I bought a little MIDI keyboard so I could start because initially I was just like taking sounds offline or just sampling whatever because these were just private pieces I wasn't releasing anywhere.
For sure.
Uh, but I was listening to enough ambient music as like part of my process that I decided to start trying to create my own little like aesthetic sketches of like
Nice.
mind spaces I was trying to create.
Yeah.
And the Ritual of Unknowing was this hypnosis piece that was born out of this that I used during this exhibition, where the framing of it is essentially within the iconography of the Borderlands, this image of a labyrinth mandala that's a gateway into the world of dreams, called the Labyrinth of Unknowing,
Hmm.
is like a central image in the hypnosis tape I made.
Wow.
And initially I've made a pared down, the version that I've made available right now is 45 minutes long about.
Wow.
Um, but essentially, the first bit is an induction, just talking hypnosis and kind of framing the thing. I call it a ritual. Part of it is that, like, I think the sort of packaging and framing puts the mind in the right place
For
before you
sure.
delve into the
Like
imagination.
set and setting, it's like
Exactly.
yeah. Hmm.
And then the final part of it is all ambient music. And what I would do when I was working on the show is I'd just switch out the back half of it for different things depending on the effect I was trying to achieve, like where I was trying to like go with my head.
Yeah.
And so I started doing these auditory sketches of the Borderlands with ambient music and
Wow.
combining field recordings. Again, I was just using this little podcasting mic, hooking it up to my
I
phone to
love
like
it.
record birds and stuff and
That's
and
awesome.
stream noises. And I
Perfect.
sampled what I couldn't get myself, from freesound.org. Like people just upload
Yeah.
audio that they've found to sort of create a fuller soundscape. But it started to be like creating these sonic sketches of the Borderlands as
Mm.
well, in addition to this hypnotic practice. So it just the volume of process work got to be so much that I realized I had the material for more actual works of art that could be audience facing than I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the altar was Me taking the private, small, little, like 1 by 1 foot altar I was keeping for myself with, actually, let me show you.
Yeah, let's see it.
I had, this was the
Yeah.
pinnacle I kept on the altar,
Wow.
um, which, that's just a wood panel I painted with the icon of the labyrinth I'd been putting
Yeah.
into my work. And that
Yeah.
central sigil was early on. I was like trying to find out a really abstracted version of what I ended up calling the Well of Dreams, this like
Yeah.
artifact that's being quested, this holy grail artifact that's being quested
Exactly.
for.
It
So I
looks
have
kind of like
like,
a grail a little bit, like some of
yeah, I
those
mean,
shapes,
it's like, the little icon I used was mostly for like personal use. Like I
Of
needed something
course.
abstract to kind of focus on, but like the white and the black triangle pointed at each other with like kind of the cup shape
Yep,
was like just a
exactly.
very like graphic kind of representation of that thing. But
Yeah.
I kept a small altar while I was working on the show and then decided towards like the 3/4 mark to create this larger version of the thing where I made like I had a 6 foot kind of I wanted like almost something tapestry like, so I had my labyrinth motif
Yep.
that printed in like a rainbow gradation taken from a painting I had made, and I put it on like a 6 foot rug that I laid down as kind of the base for the
Yep.
altar, and had the hand of the figure that gets like shot with an arrow in the show as kind of the altarpiece in the center, where it's the
Yeah,
hand doing a blessing, but there's this like stigmata, and it's
yep.
painted with this like ultra black matte
I
like
saw that.
paint.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, so it's like taking the pieces of a thing that was entirely private, and like part of me just trying to meditate on these icons, both for like hypnotic journeys and reasons, and then also for like trying to place things that then I'd be like dreaming about or trying to engage with in a more intuitive way,
Yeah.
uh, creating something public facing out of that. And then the same thing with the guided meditation I did at the gallery was
Yeah.
taking that hypnosis piece, that recorded piece, and doing something live in public with it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Did you have any any of like the audio pieces playing? Like if I were to go to the gallery
It's
today,
yeah, it's
like
playing on loop.
yeah, it's playing on loop, and so
Not
you're
not the
painting the space with those sounds. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's not the hypnosis thing.
Yeah, but
Although that
it's
is available on my website. You can
cool.
go. I basically like anything I'm making audio wise, you can just go download for free on my website.
Cool.
I'm not trying to sell any of it. It's it's
Open source. It's out there.
yeah. We'll just call it like open source hypnosis. Go
Yeah,
for it.
exactly. Oh,
But what is playing in the gallery is what I'm calling the Well of Dreams cycle, which is
yeah.
about an hour and a half of ambient audio that are these abstract sketches of the borderlands I made.
Yep. Hmm.
Something that when I first started making it, I was referring to it as I was just like, yeah, there's soundscapes. It's like drones. Like I just
Yeah.
I did anything but call it music. But like I'll be honest, it's ambient music. I was listening
Yeah.
to a lot of Brian Eno and John
Oh, I
Hopkins, that
love.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. For sure. Oh, yeah.
it's ambient music, and part of that was wanting to work with a medium I felt like an amateur in,
Yeah.
to fully DIY it, to take that creative swerve is to go into a territory I feel self-consciously
Yeah.
underprepared for,
Yeah.
because Lord knows I know my way around a paintbrush and a panel.
For
So,
sure. Right.
it's I think it's in finding some of the things that you have to clumsily like fight your way through that you start to find discovery. So,
Definitely. It's kind of like even just the phrase, like the ritual of unknowing. Like I love that phrase. Like because I think a large part of this process of like discovery is about like stripping away our sort of like solidified perceptions of what we think
mhm.
is true or not true, and letting all of that dissolve away and being in that space of unknowing. There's a
Yeah.
term that Shunryu Suzuki used in his famous book Zen Mind, beginner's mind, like the beginner's mind, the unknowing mind. Like I feel like
Yeah.
there's a similarity in concept there that makes sense. So even for you to model that, like going into an unknown kind of space of making music and soundscapes and these ambient
Yeah.
tracks, is kind of like embodying what that's about, like letting go of like trying to, because when you're making the kind of paintings you are, like you said, like your way around those materials. So I think that's cool that you kind of did that in practice as a part of this show as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like a creative agnosticism of a
Hmm.
sort where, on one level, I'm trying very hard not to decide that I know the answers to the thing going in, or
Hmm.
even fixate on like what a particular outcome could mean, but allow it to dwell in this kind of liminal space
Yeah,
where content's constantly emerging rather than finalized into finished static piece, right?
definitely.
What I always tell people chatting about paintings is, particularly for more narrative works, people want to know, what does it mean? And not only what does it mean, but what's happening? Like
Yeah.
what's happening in the story here? And there's usually somewhat of an answer to that that's solid enough that'll
Yeah.
satisfy people, but I try not to serve it to people on a plate because what I always tell people is like when you decide that an image has one meaning, you've killed the symbol,
For
right?
sure.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
for the work to retain any sense of like numinous mystery about it, this thing that we're trying to like harness in order to create our work, I think you have to dwell in that space where there is uncertainty, there is, that ambiguity. And it's not a tabula rasa. It's not just like an open place to feed ideas in. There's something there. It's
Hmm.
just not letting yourself fix it into place. That's the
Exactly.
difficult thing.
Yeah. It's scary for people to do that because
Hmm.
part of the mechanism of how our ego has developed is all centered around control.
Yeah.
Because that I think provides a feeling, albeit a false reality, that of safety.
Hmm.
And that can be comforting for people. But
Yeah.
that's also very limiting in terms of the infinite possibilities of what a moment could provide, given that we
Hmm.
let go of our preconceived ideas. And I think that's a big part of the mythopoetic journey is to let go of the control a little bit and find the play, like you were talking about earlier, the play in the childhood, the play in the unknown space of infinite possibility is
Hmm.
where meaning can show itself in surprising forms that allows, at least for me, like those kinds of experience, keep everything fresh and exciting and keep me interested and keep me connected to this feeling of constantly letting go of thinking I know what's going on or control. And it's from
Yeah.
that magical space that everything can exist in and come forth from. And as artists, we want to engage with that space because that's where the mystery of what it is we do kind of is permeating in that space. And
Yeah. I
so it
like to
makes a
think
lot of
so. Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like most artists you talk to do try to dwell in that space. It's
Yeah.
just the hardest thing to talk about. Like,
Yep.
I joke with people all the time that I've tried to perfect the art of speaking great volumes about my work without ever telling people what it means. And that's only kind of a joke because I will tell people, there's enough there that I will tell people what's, what I see that's present.
For sure, but you got
Um,
to leave space for them to bring themselves into the work, and that's where the work I
yeah.
think begins to have a deeper impact on the subconscious because
Well, and I think people sometimes feel like they need permission to do
mm,
that.
yeah, I
And
would
that's
agree with that.
why in this last show, like, up around that altarpiece, I had wall text where I wrote first person rather than having someone like write about my work.
Hmm.
I wrote first person about having creative block and using like an inward facing process and like meditation and hypnosis and all of that for like, to find my way out of the block by like instead of trying to move forward with my work, moving inward.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of framing combined with this audio piece that I saw at the opening, it was interesting. I got less of the, I think people felt more comfortable than I'm used to with that idea of unknowing.
Mm.
Um, I watched people put on these noise canceling headphones because at the opening we had, the gallery's handler did a fantastic job getting these. Like you know those like silent discos that people do
Yeah,
where
for
everyone's
sure.
wearing a head and it's all tuned to the same frequency. So that's what for the opening because there was they were playing the stuff out loud, but there's a lot of like ambient like talking that kind of thing. Uh, so we had noise canceling headphones at the opening event that people could put on,
So they could really get into that space. Yeah, that's smart. I love that.
and I was watching people put on these noise canceling headphones with kind of ambient like naturey like things that I had made playing on loop and I watched people move through an opening reception at a pace that I have literally never in my life at any opening ever seen. It
It's
was like I
amazing.
watched people walk slowly through an opening
Yeah.
and then they'd do it again. It
Yeah.
was absolutely wild. And, when I talk to people, I think people understood the attempt to dwell in that liminal space a little bit better.
Yeah.
But again, it's like all of the theater of it, all of the framing of it is to give people permission to engage with the work in a certain
Right.
way.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing you
Immediacy.
did that.
Yeah.
Because at gallery openings, there's so much energy there. There's people talking, and like no one's really looking at the work deeply or really. I mean, you can. It's just a lot more challenging too because of so much distractions, the social distractions, the
Yeah.
chatter noise, the navigating through space, depending on how many people are there. And so by giving them an opportunity to have some intimacy with the work just by canceling out all of the sonic distractions and using sound to bring
hmm
them into this space, I think what a brilliant idea. I could totally I know what you mean in terms of like
It
how
was
that can
something else.
change their experience totally. Like it was almost like
Yeah.
two different things were happening simultaneously in that room.
I felt like I had done this thing for particular reasons that had to do with like my paintings and the world that I'm making and like my process and like what I thought it would bring to like just the feeling of the work. But what I didn't anticipate is that I was kind of running this like social experiment on how people engage with art.
Yeah.
And I found that like, you know, shoot, paintings on the wall aren't quite enough to hold the attention span by themselves, no matter how sensational they are. Like
Hmm.
people look at them, like people do look at my work deeply at openings, but um you really it's like the idea of like hacking these like body systems, these like ways of interacting with the world and like bypassing our usual way to sort of intervene directly is kind of how
Yeah.
it felt like that it's like just taking someone and being like slow down.
Down. Yes, I
And I
know.
mean,
Yeah. I
I
love
loved it.
that.
It made me so happy to see.
Wow.
We always after however long an artist is working on a solo, and for me, for Corey Helfer Gallery's main room is a colossally huge space, so it
Yeah.
takes a long time to fill. So I've been working on the show for like a year and a half,
Yeah.
and that catharsis that we need at openings, like it came to me like twofold. Just seeing
Wow.
people engage with that level of depth was truly
Oh
something
man.
special. So
Think it's something you'll bring forward in future shows, like creating those kinds of opportunities for people, having seen the impact.
I hope. I mean,
Yeah.
probably not every show.
Yeah.
I think I still believe in just paintings on a wall. There's that I'll probably like do that too. But I think what that revealed to me is that I think some of these occluded parts of my practice that exist behind the curtain can come out front if they find a form that's forward facing.
Yeah.
Because people do want to see that and they do want to engage with it. Like I said, people ask for easy answers about what the work means, what the story is, but I think at the heart of that is really a desire to engage with the work more deeply.
Yeah.
And I felt that this was a way of allowing people to do that from a completely different angle without serving anyone easy answers on a plate, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I think that the work in the show is just incredible. Like you said, like your paintings are very dense in terms of the amount of thought that goes into them, the compositions, the detail work, the imagery, the colors, like that luminosity that you're achieving through the indirect painting methods, which I can definitely get a great feeling from via a screen, but I could
hmm
only imagine at scale and with actual optics, real light penetrating the painting and passing back off into me, like it's a totally different experience
Yeah.
to
Yeah. And
have.
it's
And that,
dramatic at a big scale too.
yeah, exactly. A lot of large pieces in there. So in terms of your process for pulling this work together over this past year and a half, we talked about sort of like your method of like developing those images with that box of all the material, putting together
Mhm.
those kinds of like little like narratives that you could then sketch from. Do you do like a full-fledged like rendering sketch that you then just like basically scale and carbon copy or really try to copy closely? Or is it more of a loose sketch and then you kind of fill in the details? You know what the details
Uh,
are, but like in terms of the way you're going to paint this particular foliage or the way that this, light beam is going to radiate, like,
it's more of the first, but with
yeah,
extra steps.
got you.
So my process typically for creating a painting is I'll begin with sketching in the sketchbook, and if there are extra steps in generating the idea, then there are those as well. But when it comes time to generate an image and just draw, I'll begin with thumbnail sketching, and then depending on the needs, I'll get as detailed as I feel that I need to go.
Yeah.
If it's a really really complicated composition, I'll spend more time figuring out how the pieces fit before I move to a digital space.
Yeah.
There was one painting in the show called Dream Ritual 2. There was like a 4 foot round painting, and the action of the painting takes place in the center of like a ritual circle drawn in the sand. And then that ritual circle is open on the front end with another circle attached to it that's got the labyrinth
Yep.
motif drawn in the sand as well. And on top of that complicated geometry, because I have essentially two circles, including a labyrinth in perspective, like flat on the ground,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
that whole painting, if you draw like compositional lines kind of connecting some of the like gestures and movements and locations of arms and like the angle of an eagle of the easel, that kind of thing in the image, you get a compositional heptagram. There's like a 7 pointed star
Yeah.
that maps onto the composition. So with, geometry that's that complicated in composition, I'll do a very, very complicated sketch, usually with graphite and like white marker or something on tan paper,
Yeah.
scan it. And this is the extra steps. So
Yeah.
when I say that I have to find ways to build a more intuitive part of the process in, this is why.
Yeah.
Because I go from sketches to, in a digital space, I'll photograph these physical sculptures I've made of the border creatures, of these like, lumpy kind of
Yeah.
grotesque like figures. I'll light them with colored lights, photograph them, map them onto the sketch, photograph myself so I can get hands and feet in there and like make sure the like limbs are roughly where they need to be.
Yeah.
And it's like a digital collage then onto the sketch that I've made. And then I'll bring in reference photos I've taken from hiking around, and drop those in if I feel like I need something like photographic reference. And then if that's not enough, or I'm happy with like the staging of the landscape, I'll come in with a tablet and just sort of like roughly digitally sketch on top of it and like
Got it.
change some of the layout.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's mostly a mix of collage and digital painting, but some of what I'm collaging in is stuff that I've built and photographed.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, I have a digital study that's very, very close compositionally to what the final painting's going to be. The color, it's digital, so it's all CMYK.
Yeah.
I get the color to be in the ballpark of what I'm kind of thinking, but I understand my materials as an oil painter well enough that I kind of only loosely regard the color in the study
Yeah.
as important, because I kind of know what I'm doing when I hit the canvas, but
Yeah. You
like
know which
at the panel.
pigments you need to use. Yeah.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I'll take that digital study that is extremely close to what I want to make so that I know exactly where everything needs to be placed, and I
Yeah.
will scale it up and I will just trace it directly onto the panel. I mean, like it's like at that point I've already spent dozens of hours making the study. Like I need to get onto the painting. So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to impress anyone like who's not watching, like by hand drawing everything, like because it's like when you're trying to get things to line up that closely, like just use it works, makes the
Yeah,
work. So
use the tools available to
yeah,
you, right?
yeah,
Especially with the complexity of the compositions that you're
yeah,
creating. It makes perfect sense because like you want to because the painting process itself is going to be heavily involved. So you
Yeah.
want to make sure that these preliminary parts of your process don't drag on too long so that you can because at the end of the day, people aren't really going to be able to see those. They're going to see the paintings. And so you got to make sure you find a balance there, which I'm sure depending on
Yeah.
the imagery, those change in terms
Right.
of how much
It's
time
like, but how to be both inefficient, like wildly inefficient, and
with
as
the
efficient
painting.
as possible. Like
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
like pick your battles. Like I choose inefficiency as like an intentional move when it comes to generating ideas. Like
Hmm.
that's my inefficiency that I allow
Yeah.
myself because creativity and efficiency aren't friends. Like
No.
I allow the ideas to come more organically. I go seeking for them in really messy, interesting ways. But when it comes time to generate like what the final image is going to be, I think of it like, you know, um, it's almost like I'm creating devotional art for what I feel like I've dug up. In a sense, I was telling people like it's not about detail for detail's sake. I think sometimes the really fine work that goes on in my paintings, the careful attention to surface and like paint application, all of these things, it feels ornamental to me in a certain respect, and
Yeah.
ornamental in a way where I kind of think about like, I've found something that I feel like is worthwhile to make and to spend, potentially hundreds of hours creating. Uh, and so the labor that goes into it at a certain point becomes this like devotional act of like
Yep.
raising up the symbol that I've gone diving for,
Yeah.
and giving it a form that's as like cloaked in beauty as I can achieve,
Yeah. I
with
love the
whatever skill I
devotional
have.
side. Yeah. I love the devotional kind of perspective because I think that's going to give you the energy you need to in times in the middle of these paintings, I'm sure, everything goes up and down all the time. So like some paintings that come through much easier than others, I'd imagine. But then you have kind of an anchor, you have a center, you
Mhm.
have like an intention that's like deeply rooted to give you the energy and motivation to complete a piece or paint it in the midst of frustration
Yeah,
or
I
exhaustion, right?
I
So
think you could think about it as like having faith in
yeah.
the creative practice. Like I said earlier, like I hit a point of creative block early in working on the show. More accurately, it was like a full creative burnout, like the
Mm-hmm.
worst I've maybe ever experienced.
Oh,
And I think what I like, everyone when burnout happens, it happens for different reasons. Sometimes you're working yourself too hard in the short term. Sometimes it's years in the making. I think mine was years in the making.
mm,
And sometimes it's just about workload, and sometimes it's something else. And for me, I um I talk about it as like a crisis of faith
mm.
in meaning, and the meaningfulness of the gesture of what I was doing.
Oh,
And I found that, I had plenty of ideas. I could keep sketching, I could keep painting, but I felt like I was going to damage my creative instrument by just barreling forward.
yeah.
Because if you're working on a thing that requires that much labor and you don't believe in it,
Yeah,
that's going to hurt you.
exactly.
So part of what's required is finding that like thread of connection to, the deep parts of your imagination
Yeah.
that allow creativity to flow freely. And ultimately, I think that like rebuilding that sort of sense of connection to my own creative source ended up becoming a part of the imagery and content of the mythology in the show that I've got.
Wow. Was there like a moment, like how did you navigate that process in terms of like, was there a moment where you became aligned again with that intentionality, that devotion, that perspective of like what you're doing and the importance of it for you? What was
Um,
that? You know what I mean? Like what was there a specific moment that got you to like kind of get up out of the slumber of the creative block?
no, I like the way I started talking about it because I started, I think, towards the latter half of my show seeing the alignment between the imagery I'd been painting and what I had just gone through.
Mm.
And there's a section of paintings in the show where this character Maker, who's received this deadly wound that they're being poisoned by, and is searching the dream world for a cure, and they're questing through the dream world. and they have to cross the wasteland to do this.
Mm.
And I have these series of paintings where it's this, this figure of this sculptor who's afraid and depressed and wandering through like various sort of blasted landscapes. And there's one where it's like in a desert, another in like a forest populated by
Yeah.
owls. And
Yep.
in mythology and in the mystical like Grail quests mythology, the wasteland isn't just a desert, it's a blasted spiritual landscape. And
Mm.
I think about creative block and what I went through as less a moment of like, now I'm out. This is the aha moment. Like I've received my inspiration now. I'm all better. And more like a physical journey in a sense, of
Yeah.
like crossing a wasteland where, the point in which you've left the wasteland isn't necessarily immediately clear. It's just that you put one foot in front of the other in
Yeah.
whatever capacity you can until you find that you are no longer surrounded by blasted trees.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that like process of using a automatic writing and cut up technique and hypnosis and all of that, I was doing that when I felt like I couldn't paint. You
Mm.
know, that came out of not being able to move forward.
Mm.
I started working in these ways where it felt like, if I was generating a sketch through these like automatic techniques, like I didn't need to believe in it because it was just a sketch and I could just move on to the next one. And ultimately I was making these things, and at the time I almost had like a disdainful like a relationship to the practice I was developing, where I was just like, I don't know if this is anything. I don't know that this is worthwhile, and I don't know if
Mm.
these are going to turn into paintings. But not only did they turn into paintings, but unintentionally, they, I think, ended up carrying this like seed of narrative of what I was going through,
Yeah.
in the way that things tend to do when you work in that way, and that
Yeah.
kind of surrealist process.
Exactly. It's amazing how it's mirrored, in the
Hmm.
work that actually came through it. And it's hard,
Yeah.
like in retrospect, you can see that now. And I'm sure as it started to crystallize the show and the paints coming together, like you said, toward like the last third quarter of, you
Hmm.
started to notice how that happens. But I just think to me, that's part of the mystery and the magic of the creative process, that there's something underneath the surface of what we fully don't understand that's, you could say, guiding us or pointing us or influencing us in these unconscious ways to make decisions
Hmm.
that we're not really sure of in the moment why we're choosing to do this particular thing.
Yeah.
But then when you look at it in retrospect, it's like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense as to how I
Yeah.
got from A to B. To me, that's inspiring because it reminds me as a creator, as an artist, that like this isn't all just about me, or
Hmm.
me as in like my personal ego identity, me being
Hmm.
Martin, all that. There's something bigger going on through this lens of me that I need to surrender to and trust. um,
Absolutely.
so hopefully that'll be a
Absolutely.
good memory for you, is because I'd imagine like this is a life path for people like you and me.
Yeah.
Like this is
Yeah.
part of our life path. So I imagine those things will happen again in new ways. And so this will be cool to be able to draw on that memory of trust, of like, to, like you said, like put one step in front of the other through the
Hmm.
blasted landscape, through the wasteland,
Yeah.
and you'll find your way out eventually. Like just continuing to find trust or faith, like you said, in that
Yeah,
creative
and
process.
I think, something else you said that I think is important is this idea of surrender, that,
Mhm.
within the mythology of the show, this character maker, this artist, the sculptor, they receive this wound from one of the villains of the mythology, the specters, fires an arrow that pierces their left hand and poisons them and blackens it. And
Mhm.
before they enter the dream world, this whole thing with the labyrinth of unknowing that I keep referencing, what happens there is Maker tries to use their own work to heal the wound. There's a painting I have where it's called Work in Progress, and Maker's situated between two huge marble sculptures that they've been working on, and they have a
Yeah.
table in the foreground where they've ground up
Such an epic piece.
it's somewhat ambiguous what the action is, as these tend to
Yeah.
be, but the way that I've related to what the image is I kind of like to imagine that this bowl of white powder in the foreground is ground up marble dust, that there's some sort of alchemical reaction happening with,
Yeah.
where they're burning this, like it's like creating like a volcano out of like a mountain of
Yeah.
marble dust, where they're
Wow.
lighting the top of it in this like flash, almost like gunpowder, and the
Yeah.
smoke is going up through the hole in the hand. But this image of work in progress is Maker is not healing the wound. The smoke is passing through the wound. The work isn't enough. That like the force of will, like the will get you far.
Yeah.
Ego will get you far. You can't abandon ego as an artist. Like,
For sure.
but it also is not enough, I think, to heal what we ask it to heal sometimes.
Hmm.
And in order to heal themselves, Maker had to lean on the other border creatures, the other characters in the mythology who created this ritual and this, symbol, this mandala of a labyrinth as kind of a magical gateway.
Hmm.
And by falling asleep beneath the icon of the labyrinth of unknowing, where I think the painting I had in the exhibition. So this is a show that's the narrative split between two exhibitions I've done. This is the conclusion of it. In the first one, I had a painting where Maker falls asleep with the labyrinth hanging behind them in this blue kind of flag with a hole cut out in the center with the moon showing through. But the labyrinth is above them and then repeated down below on the ground, and they're slowly tracing the lines of the labyrinth in their sleep as they're falling asleep. And how I came to relate to that kind of symbol of Maker passing into the dream world is, not just the ways that I was using my process to kind of follow those roads, but also I think there's something important in the idea of surrender. As you've
Yeah.
said, like when the ego is not going to give you what you need, when the will isn't going to give you the tools to fight your way free of this thing. That sometimes submission to it is what's required. That
Yeah.
like you have to become receptive again. Like
Yeah.
we can't always be the creative action that we put into the universe like goes far, but it reaches its limits, and we have to stop acting and start receiving. And
Yeah.
that requires a certain level of surrender and a certain level of intellectual humility, which is kind of where that unknowing word
Yeah.
started to come in.
Yeah.
You know, uh, Delving without any intention, delving without any intention of grabbing hold of anything and deciding what it means, but just operating in this kind of feeling of blindness and faith and surrender, as a creative pursuit. Sure. I mean, I think ultimately the story that kind of unfolded in the show of Maker kind of surrendering to this process of diving into the dream world, crossing the wasteland, and finding the source of creativity and pulling it out into their world to sort of move beyond this injury to transmute it into a source of power. I think there's something I relate to as like that as a description of the creative journey.
Yeah.
But again, like that's just one angle of approach at the symbol, and I don't want to lock it down into like a preset meaning either. But that's how it's come to be meaningful for me.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. I think this show, just anyone out there who's in LA or near there needs to go see it. How long is the show up for? How much longer?
It's up through March 28th,
Okay.
and
So just a few more weeks.
also I did. It was a couple weekends ago. I did the live ritual of unknowing that I spoke about.
Yeah.
I'm that was successful enough. I think we got like something like 20, 25 people. I mean, it was well attended.
Yeah.
But it was successful enough, and there was enough interest that I've decided to do it again on the
Awesome.
closing day. So it's through March 28th, and on March 28th, which is the last Saturday the show's on view, from 2 to 3 p.m., I'm going to be doing the ritual of unknowing live at the gallery again.
Beautiful.
So if anyone wants to come and you're in LA, please come out. It's totally free. Just bring a yoga mat and a pillow so you can lay down,
Yeah. Oh
get
man.
comfy, get
I wish
relaxed.
I was there. I wish I could come out for it, man. Oh, that's the only thing that's I'm in Kentucky, so like I'm far
Yeah.
away. But
Well, that's why I made the audio file free to download
I
is
love it.
it's 45 minutes. Basically, it's like you just have to have 45 minutes where you can be not distracted. I recommend noise canceling headphones and a sleep mask, but you can kind of, I mean, there's no wrong way to use
For
it.
sure, yeah.
But I think this like, by using hypnosis, it's really just trying to invite people to, I've created a certain way of engaging with my creativity and my subconscious, and these are the tools that I've used that work for me. But really, like, I kind of want to show people, like, because I figured this out myself using free software. I mean, I just downloaded Audacity and taught myself how to use it. Like, you can play around with it yourself. I mean,
For
these
sure.
tools are absolutely out there. You can teach yourself how to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think it's amazing though to like again engage with something that's a little bit outside your comfort zone, but to create something that has a real intention behind
Hmm.
it. Like first off, starting like doing something just out of the love of your heart for your wife to help her, and then
Hmm.
spiraling into this offering that you obviously have for free on your website that people can also experience in person. I recommend anybody out there who's hears this probably only have a couple of weeks left to go, but make it happen. I mean, the amount of work that went into this is incredible. It's inspiring. I love getting just time to just dive into your world a little bit and learning about
Thank you.
your process, and it just gets me really excited about like where things might even evolve from here. I think these mythologies that you created are creating these beautiful containers for people to relate to, hopefully, maybe kind of create a relationship with their own sense of mythology in their own life,
Hmm.
because we are all playing the archetypes in our lives. And so, if we can become more connected to those inner narratives, it might bring us some strength when we need it. It might bring us some direction when we need it. And at the very end of the day, it can just bring us something, a way to engage with our imaginal selves again,
Hmm.
because this culture can be so numbing and
Yeah.
so literal and materialist based that like we've lost touch with the whole side of the imaginal realm and the inner world and inner life that we all have. And I think we live in a time where we need to be reinitiated in that more than ever. And I know you're doing that as an example through your life as an artist and the work you make. So thank you so much
Of
for what you
course. Thank
do.
you.
We've been talking about an hour. I think this is a good way to kind of wrap it up for this time.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing everything. And everybody out there, check the show notes, got links to everything with Adrian's work. I'll have info about the closing and all that. Obviously, follow him on social media so you can stay deeply connected and keep your feed inspired by cool stuff instead of all the BS out there. Fill your feed with good things like what Adrian's up to. And we'll talk soon, man. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. We'll talk soon. Peace. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.